Taurai Jack, right, is also very passionate about education. Now, if you would remember, this is our third week, and one thing that was consistent in these 3 weeks, or in the last 2 weeks, you constantly say education, education, education. So I can't stress that enough. Right? So just a recap, and before I can actually introduce you to our esteemed guest, just a recap on what we did last week and some of the things that we touched on. So I can't mention everything else, but I just mentioned just a few. And the first thing, it was continuous learning, that every level that you want to go to requires a different type of education, right? And we're not referring to your traditional institution, right? We're talking about finding a coach and reading a book and being around like-minded people. You know, if you hang around Tutsis, you know what's going to happen. I'm just saying. And we also touched on, I've also stressed on the fact that it is important that we become financially literate. And I like the example that Taurai Jack made last week, and said, if you're doing accounting, doesn't mean that you are financially literate. But anyway, it is one of those things. And also, we talked about, okay, I mentioned this in the first point, of being around like-minded people. And the most important thing that I've heard Taurai Jack mention more than once is take action all the time. Take action every single time, right? And the last bit, and the last part, which for me really spoke the most and the loudest, when he said, find a bigger reason for doing what you're doing. Find a bigger reason for doing the things that you want to try and achieve, right? In my case, that's my daughter. Right. I'm going to share this with you just a bit, and we can introduce our guest, then we can continue with the interview. I remember a couple of years ago when I left work, right? I was a manager somewhere. I won't mention the name, right? And when I left, I told my bosses, I set them down. There were a couple, and I said, bosses, it is time for me to resign. I quit. I'm going. I'm going. And they were like, why are you leaving? And I said to them, should I die now? Will my daughter inherit my job? And they said, no. And I said, that is the main reason why I am leaving. And there's a main reason why I am sitting here today and having this conversation with TJ here, because of I've got this, that's something bigger than Ukolani. It's something bigger than me. You know, and whenever you've got something that is bigger than you, every time when you meet challenges out there, it becomes a bit, you've got a fighting chance because you're no longer fighting for you. With that being said, good afternoon, Taurai Jack. How are you doing, my brother?
Yes, sir. King, how are you, Tolani? I'm very well, thanks. And it's great to be back again on another week. I'm trusting that everyone's week has been wonderful and your week has been good too.
Yeah, I've had a fabulous, challenging week, so to say. But not every single time, there's always challenges, right? And just to put it out there to our listeners, right? Today we're looking into 4 problems in the real estate investing that you need to know, right? Yeah. And it's absolutely important that you need to know that. And I will also advise people to go to Taurai Jack on YouTube, right? And as I was looking into these 4 problems in real estate investing,
yeah,
right, that you need to know, right? And the first thing that came into my mind, not the first thing that came to my face, like boom, in your face, it was Rand Tribunal, right? And it was the first time that I come across such a term. That wasn't the first time that I even read about Rand Tribunal. And what is Rand Tribunal and their function thereof?
Yeah. Okay, cool. So thanks, Tulani. So I think depending on who you are, you see the Rent Tribunal in a good or in a bad light. But basically, what the Rent Tribunal is all about is to safeguard those that are paying rent to the landlord, and making sure that, you know, the conditions of living and what the rental is all about is within acceptable conditions. That's number one. But they're not just there for the tenant, the person who's paying rent. They're also there for the landlord. So we can safely say that the rent tribunal is the mediator between those that are in the business of renting out properties and those that are also in the business of renting from landlords. So it works both ways. And simply put, Xolani, how it works is that it's a case by case. They are a mediator, that's what they are. So they don't fall on anyone's side per se, and they're not biased, right? And however, they also work within the confinements of the law. What is allowed, what is not. And being a mediator for that purposes, it basically means that I, as a landlord, I can go to the rent tribunal and say my tenant is not paying. So as I was explaining to Lani, the rent tribunal is basically a mediator. I mean, if you're to look at it at very layman terms, the easiest way is that they represent the tenant, they represent the landlord, they work within the confinements of the law, of the Rental Act. And if you're in the business of property rentals, you should know of that document. It's a readily available document. And anyone who then submits a query, it becomes a case, and both parties are called in, and you get to have, I want to say, an officer, or should I say a lawyer, who then mediates. And obviously they are looking at it from a law perspective. Your case, whoever who is the complaint, and whoever who is responding at that particular time, and they make a judgment, and their judgment holds, and out of that, the case is closed. And it's that simple. You don't pay anything, nobody pays anything.
So it's for free.
I've been to the rent tribunal myself, and it wasn't a good experience.
You said that you went to the rent tribunal, right? And you've had your own experience there. Just share with us the experience that you had with the rent tribunal.
Well, look, so I buy properties. That's what I do for a living, right? So we bought this particular property, and these guys were literally wanting to take advantage. And there's people that are out there, whether they are tenants, landlords, and I'm saying they are people, right? There are people who want to take advantage of situations. It's just life. And basically, we bought a small building of about 10 units, and out of that, we went in and introduced ourselves. The person who had bought the property from us didn't introduce us. So we then inherited tenants, which is normally something that I don't like doing, but we did that. And these guys literally said, look, we don't know who you are, and you are not the landlord. And whoops, they went to the rent tribunal and reported to us that there is people who are claiming to be the owners of the property, and out of that, we thinking that they are not the landlord. So the rent tribunal, so it's a case, right? The rental tribunal then wrote to me, and they said to me that, well, Mr. Jack, apparently you are claiming to be the owner of this property, and there's 10 families that have complained. Please come through. This was sometime in October, and the case was supposed to be heard in January. Now, this is the bummer part now. The status quo of whatever that is there is supposed to stay. So which means that these guys are not supposed to pay rent to me because they don't. Yeah. So these guys, they knew that. And so for October, they didn't pay rent. November, they didn't pay rent. January, December, they didn't pay rent. January, we went there, and basically I pitched up with my deeds registration and with my attorney. And the attorney who is working for the tribunal said, okay, thank you very much. So he take our paper and he shows these guys. There was a group of 10 of them. And he literally said, are you guys satisfied? And they said, yes, is it true that they are the landlord? And the rent tribunal officer said, yes, it is, because the document said so. And they said, is it legit? And the rent tribunal officer said, yes. And then they said, okay, so from now on, you now need to start paying rent.
Yeah.
Whilst I was in there, I then asked the question to say, hold on, now that they know that I'm the landlord, can we back dead rent from October? Because they've been in my property.
Yeah.
And at that time, the officer said to me, well, it's not part of the query that was brought in, so you need to put in a claim, another claim or another query. So I was like, what do you mean? This is part of why we are here. So
exactly.
In my circumstances, I felt like the rent tribunal was kind of like a toothless dog for me. That's what I felt. But in context, there's a process that needs to be followed here, which I didn't follow. So emotionally, I was like, this process doesn't work. But from a process perspective, in understanding how they work, which is also very important here, Tolani, when you jump into something, like if you buy a car, understand how the car works.
Definitely.
Because if you understand how it works, then the process does not frustrate you when it starts working the way it's supposed to be working.
True.
Right?
True.
But for me, I had already started buying properties. I didn't know what the rent tribunal was all about until at that particular time. And I should have actually put in a counter query that should have been heard on the same day that this case was being heard. But I just thought, well, we're going into court, so everything needs to be discussed there without understanding their process. So I think the biggest mistake for me there is understanding the different bodies that are there, and also understanding how those processes work. And if you don't know, then get through to a lawyer or someone else who's been exposed to that, and say, how can we solve for this? And basically, that was my experience for the rent tribunal. I haven't been there. I don't want to go back there again. I manage my tenants now very different, so that the case doesn't even need to get that far. And I don't inherit tenants anymore.
All right. The issue around inheriting tenants, we actually speak about that at the last point. Every time a person learns, right? A lot of us don't have an idea of what the term hoarding cost mean. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Hoarding cost. What is hoarding cost? Because I've heard you speak about it, and I just want myself and the listeners to have a clear picture and understanding of what this really is.
Sure. So holding. So it's holding as in hold, right?
All right.
Not holding as having many things that you have. So it's holding cost. So holding cost basically means, so for instance, when you're buying a property, in the line of business that I'm in, which is for rental purposes, you want to work your numbers in the fact, let's just say it's a 2-bed, 1-bath. So you got a 2-bed, 1-bath, you bought it for 200, and there's a bank repayment of, let's say, 2,000 Rand on it, and insurance 100 Rand. So you got levies maybe for another 100 Rand. So you're all in for 2,200 every month. Okay. So your holding cost is, I'm buying this property, but I actually don't know when I'm going to have a tenant. So I want to hold at least in my pocket maybe 3 months of my expenses that I'm going to incur if I don't get a tenant. So which means my 2,200 Rand, which is 2,000 the repayment of the bond, 100 Rand on insurance, 100 Rand on rates and taxes and levies, whatever we might call it. So it's an expense that I need to pay. And this expense here, I'm saying that I need to save for that money in my pocket or at the bank, or I have to hold this money for the purposes of if I don't have a tenant, then I am able to pay for that. I normally take, for student accommodation, we normally take a 9 months holding cost.
Oh, okay.
So all my expenses times 9 months. And why am I saying times 9 months? Where we have properties where we do have NSFAS students, sometimes NSFAS pays, they delay the payment. Last year it happened. But if you're in a good university where they are paying, let's say every 3 months, I would say maybe your holding cost should be maybe 6 months. On a normal tenant, how long do you want to keep your holding costs for? Maybe around about 6 months or maybe 3 months. So the quicker you can have income or have a tenant, obviously the lesser you want to keep as holding costs, because that's money as well that you're keeping. And that money is obviously, if you have to put it in somewhere else to work, it can work for you. If it's sitting in your pocket, it's not really working for you. You're saving it for a rainy day. And it's good to have that holding cost, because it basically means if something happens, you've got money to pay for your expenses and you're not stressed. It really takes you not more than 3-6 months to fill up a property. Then there's really something wrong with you, either your pricing or the location, or what you're offering as a landlord.
Yeah, no, thanks for this, for that point. You know, as I was thinking about the process of eviction, right, and where I'm from, particularly in the townships, right, I've seen quite a lot of landlords when they want to evict you, right. I could see with the methodology that it is actually illegal. They actually call their uncles who knows their uncle's grandfather, that all of them come there. And evict you, right? And I've seen that backfire in terms of the legal side of this. So I just want you to take us through the proper process, you know, of evictions.
Yeah, I think as a landlord, that's a painful discussion to have with any landlord, especially if you've gone through that process. And I would also assume that it's a painful discussion for a tenant, because it's not everyone who's wanting to not to pay rent and be evicted and, you know, having their socks and groceries out on the street. It's an embarrassment. It's inhumane. It's not who we are. Now, the legal process of it, I think anyone can go ahead and read about it. And basically what it is that you want to evict someone because potentially they're not paying rent, right? There's a reason why you are wanting to evict someone. So the first thing is that obviously you need to save them a notice. So let's just assume that this is someone who's not paying rent, right? If they're not paying rent, the first thing that you need to do is, as a landlord, is to set them with a notice, obviously, of acknowledging the debt, because they're owing you now, isn't it? And maybe you might want to go into a conversation of how long are you going to be paying me for this amount that is outstanding, and this is a document that, you know, you can get. I'm a big fan of TPN. You can get them online, tpn.co.za. They have good tools in terms of what is legal and what is not legal. And they've got a pack templates that you can use on your own to do the eviction process. So it tells you, do 1, 2, 3. If the tenant doesn't do this, do that. And all of these are correctly labeled in from a law perspective. So what's the first thing? Your tenant doesn't pay rent for month number 1. What do? Send them an acknowledgement of rent. Or, well, first, you need to check in with them why they're not paying their rent, isn't it? Encourage them maybe to pay a portion of the rent and things like that. Find a way first in helping them, because there is a problem here. They didn't just come to your property to squat. There is a problem. What is the problem? So come from a humane perspective. If that fails, then an acknowledgement of debt kicks in. And then thereafter, you want to give them an eviction notice. So you are notifying them you're going to evict them. And you can then go through the legal route, which is now for some people, when you give them an acknowledgement of debt, they say, no, I'm going to stay with my mom. Now I can't afford to pay this. Then they move, right? So which means that they've moved, but they still owe you some money. But for some landlords, they're like, no, leave your bed here. You can move, but leave your bed here. Look, people do different things. So the first process is acknowledgement of debt. Then there's an eviction notice. And then if they don't follow that, then you now need to get like a court order or something like that to evict someone. But bearing in mind,
let us just quickly jump to the last point, right? And I've heard you mention this with so much passion. You don't like the idea of inheriting tenants, right? So is it a good idea for a new investor to buy a property where they inherit tenants? I mean, because I would think to myself, look, if I'm buying a property and there are tenants already there, so it means I'm not going to do much work in regards to marketing the place and saying there's a new owner in town and all of that. It means that everything's going to be smooth for me. So why on earth are you opposed to that?
So my answer to that question, Kolani, is yes or no, right? It is good to do that. It is also not good to do that. So my business partner, whose name is Bevan, he is our property manager. So he looks after all of our properties. And basically, we have had to come to what we call a middle ground. What is a middle ground? A middle ground is understanding what you are buying. All right. And if you're understanding what you're buying, then it gives you confidence whether you're going to inherit or not inherit anyone. Now, I want to be very clear around that process, because if you inherit what you don't know, it's going to bite you a little bit later. What are you inheriting? Is it a cat? Or is it a lion that looks like a cat when it's small? What is it? Right? Now, if you know what you are inheriting, so what do I mean by that? Right. So I buy a property and it's a two bed one bath, and there's a tenant in there. I will only inherit that tenant if the previous landlord gives me their credit report, their contract, and out of that, I am then satisfied that this is a good person who's paying. I might also just ask them to say, can I do a refresher vetting of this person to make sure that they will be able to pay my rent. Then on top of that, there's rules and regulations. Maybe the person that was the previous landlord, they were okay to get the rent on the 10th, on the 15th, or maybe on 45th, right, of the month. But for me, I want my rent on the 1st of each month. So now that's new terms and new rules and regulations that you are putting in place as the new landlord. So if you understand this process that I've just spoken about, and if you have that process in place, then inherit. It's good to inherit because you can ask those questions and you can inherit, right? And then thereafter, you are comfortable with what you're inheriting. But if you don't have any of those things and the current landlord says to you, there's no contracts, and you go on into it's a 2-bed 1-bath name, you walk into that room, into first bedroom number 1, and you can see curtains, and out of the curtains, there's another curtain. And you're like, so how many people are staying here? Then they say to you, 1 person. You can see for yourself that there's 45 people living in this 2-bed 1-bath. How are you going to control that? For me,
it's a clear no.
It's a no. I'm going to move on and I'm saying, please evict these people before I buy the property for me.
Yeah, all right, we are shying away of time, and I know that would love to go on and talk and talk and talk, but the truth of the matter is every good thing does come to an end. But this good thing is going to be back next week, Wednesday, from 1:15 to run about 1:45, right? Yeah. So it is exactly 13:50. So we're going to have to say goodbye to Taurai Jack, the property mogul from M5 Property Addicts, right? I'm going to see you next week. As we'll be having more conversation and people be empowered and educated. Thank you very much for giving us the time to be with you today. Cheers.